Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. This video accompanies our learning module on transferability. From what we've been able to read, look at this week, you've probably developed a pretty good sense of transferability as well as its many different dimensions. How we can apply transferability within methods, across different environments, theoretical transferability, and how all of these are important. But I really wanted to put together a video to really emphasize how really essential transferability is in terms of the rigor and the quality of case studies, qualitative research in general, but case studies in particular, and why transferability is particularly well suited to case studies. Because case studies employ a variety of methods, really sets us up very well in terms of transferability, using different methods, using different sources. Give you an example from some of my own research in the past. Some years back, this is probably about 20 years ago, before I came here, I worked at a small college in Virginia in institutional advancement. It was my first job out of grad school. Being a historian, I was fascinated by the history of the institution. I'd been around for quite some time, had a rather unique history, and being in the South, it was also culturally very different for me. So I was very fascinated in its origins and the course of its history and how it got to where it was. One of the things I discovered was that in the 1960s, up until that time, it had been a single-sex institution, women, and it had only been white. Only white females could apply. Private institution. And it decided to integrate around that time. And there were several reasons. One of them having to do with the Civil Rights Act at the time. It made it impossible for students to secure federally subsidized loans for higher education if they went to an institution that was not desegregated, or to put it better, discriminated on the basis of race, among other things. What fascinated me was how well this institution did it. At the time I was there, it was one of the largest minority-serving public institutions in the state, which I found to be remarkable. I became rather curious about how this was done. I had access at the time, working there, to people who'd been administrators, faculty, other people in the community who were involved in it at the time. The decision had to be made, of course, by the board of trustees. Now, if any of you have been on a committee, and we're on way too many in higher education, if you ask me, if you've been on a committee, then you realize somebody at each meeting has to take the minutes. Sometimes it's one individual consistently doing it. Sometimes people take turns. But you probably noticed, if you read the minutes after the meeting, that the level of detail in there is far from what actually takes place. And in fact, there can be almost no detail in terms of a discussion. Who says what? Who disagreed? Sometimes even the vote is not recorded. Simply, a measure passed. Was it unanimous? Was it close? Was it split decision in the chair? Cast a vote. Oftentimes those aren't stated in there. But the point is, minutes of meetings can sometimes be very incomplete. And there are largely two reasons for that. One is because nobody likes taking minutes at meetings. Let's be honest, it's a thankless task. So many people will try and write down as little as just as much as they need to, just to get the job done. Second reason, and that's a fairly innocuous reason. The second reason, and this can be a little more difficult, is that oftentimes a lot of information will be purposely, intentionally left out of the meetings. Now, there could also be reasons for this. Sometimes they could involve personnel issues, in which records might become public, especially if it's a public institution. So we'll leave those things out so they won't be discovered through an open records search. There's nothing insidious about that. It's simply general precautions that many people take regarding personnel issues. Sometimes it could be a very sensitive subject where people don't want to go on the record as having said something, so the committee will maybe agree that they will put as little information into the minutes, just enough to satisfy record-keeping purposes. That happens very often also. So there are different reasons. There are omission by no ill intent, and then there are omissions, very deliberate omissions. Sometimes there are legitimate reasons for those omissions, and sometimes there are less than legitimate reasons for those omissions. But the point is, the minutes of a meeting are oftentimes generally far less detailed than what actually takes place. Now, when I began the study at the institution, because it's a private institution, I had to get permission from the president of the college to access the Board of Trustees meetings minutes. Yeah, I was allowed to do so. I found they were very brief, not much detail at all. Really nothing in terms of who said what. It was basically this was proposed, a discussion followed, a vote, approved, denied, whatever. And I found that kind of discouraging because it didn't really tell me a lot about why, what were the motives, why did the institution decide to desegregate? Was it a moral issue? Was it an economic issue? And how did they decide to go about it the way they did? Because the way they did it was very, very pragmatic, very successful. So that one dimension, that one data source, didn't answer a lot of questions. So that's where we begin to triangulate. We look at different data sources, try and find other data sources that may shed light on that question. A lot of time had gone by since that institution desegregated, and only one member of the Board of Trustees from that time was still alive, which does say something about how urgent these studies are, given the fact that people from this time period, 1960s, were involved in these things, and many of them are gone now. And I'm sure the individual who I interviewed on the board is probably gone by now also. He gave me a very different perspective of what took place at the meeting. The discussion, very enlightening, and it was far more information than I could obtain through anything in the written records, the minutes. That's an example of triangulation and how it really can work. It's important to think of these things sometimes like a diamond, facets of a diamond. We can never see the whole diamond at once. We turn it around, look at it in different perspectives. And the purpose of qualitative research is for us to have a holistic perspective. And in order to do that, we have to have multiple lines of sight at an issue. And that is why triangulation is really so essential. And in the case of this study, if I had not used triangulation, really the important lessons, and there were some very important lessons, would have been lost. Get to the end of the story. It was a Baptist institution, so they decided to involve local black Baptist clergy to serve as advisors and intermediaries in the integration process, because clergy had a tremendous moral authority at the time. And it worked very well, so successfully that at the time I was there, as I mentioned, it was the largest minority-serving private institution in the state. It was a very pragmatic way of how an institution and members of a community can work together to solve a problem that's of common interest. But the most important lesson from this is how important triangulation is, particularly in case studies and how it can serve to shed light on information, data that is critical to understanding a study. Just a little added information from what was in their curriculum. As usual, if you have any questions about your papers, please let me know. As I say before, I never get to meet with people face-to-face often enough, so please don't think you're imposing on me by calling, emailing, or just asking to meet on campus. All right, have a good week, everyone. I'll be in touch. Bye-bye.